Okay, I guess we can get started. I see we still have people trickling in, but don't want to waste your time talking about sports and the Green Bay Packers. Good win for the Wolverines this weekend and the 1 seed. I know we got some other Mark's turning on his camera with his Michigan sweatshirt on right away. So yes, I don't know that the most elite school of Michigan should have Michigan versus everybody as their current moniker, but I understand where you're coming from. Jen, MSU dodgeball was undefeated this weekend too. I think that is appropriate. Jen's freshman son is on MSU's dodgeball team, so that is a good thing to recognize.
He says they're a dodgeball school.
Well, and this year that with football, it probably is better that they're a dodgeball school.
Is that NCAA dodgeball or is it intramural or what?
It's club. It's National Collegiate Dodgeball Association.
Wow.
And oddly, MSU is the reigning national champion.
Today I learned.
All right. Welcome to everybody. Thanks for being on today. As you know from past webinars, this is an opportunity really for you to share with each other things that are going on in your district, points of pride, struggle points. I was talking earlier before we got on. I attend a lot of workshops in PD during the course of the year, and oftentimes we'll have an item on the agenda that says what's keeping you up at night. And that's kind of what I thought I would roll out to have the conversation start here is, what are some issues that you have going on in your district? What are future things that you're thinking of that might be 2 or 3 years down the road in your district that you're just going, man, I don't know how we're going to address this, solve this. And I bring it up not because MASB can be the solution for all of your problems, but maybe some of your colleagues can give you solutions or insights to what some of those problems are. So I first open it up and just see, oh, Norm, that's impressive to be coming in from across the Atlantic Ocean and still tuning into the webinar. That's appreciated. So anything going on out in your districts that you're really struggling with or wondering, like, how are you going to deal with it as a district? I'd be happy to have somebody throw it out there, raise your hand, or just put it in chat or shout out. Let's see, Stan, you're unmuted. I don't know if that's on purpose. Thought he was going to start the day for us.
I've got something.
All right, Kathleen.
Hello, everybody. Actually, I'm on the phone because I just left physical therapy where my physical therapist have a child who's in basketball. And the conversation came around to the issue that we have with busing. We can't get enough buses to get our kids to sports activities. So it's just something we haven't been able to solve, and it really creates inequity because you've got parents who have to get their kids to a sport, an hour away on a work night. And so we're dealing with that issue. I wonder if anybody has any solutions for that.
That's a great question, Kathleen. That's something I know that as I've talked to superintendents and board members last year and this year, there's shortages in many fields, right? Teaching and other things. But the shortage of bus drivers hits parents when they need to figure out alternative transportation at 5:30 in the morning, when they find out they won't have a bus route that day, or they're, more often than not, junior high, middle school kids, all of a sudden at, 3:30 have to be on a bus to go somewhere and they don't have a bus. And we're looking, for parents to drive them. Any districts that have put something in place in the last couple of years that helped you attract bus drivers to your districts? Be interested in hearing.
Don, I just read something in Mirrors yesterday, which I've been saying this ever since recreational marijuana became legal, is one of the issues that's causing or contributing, I should say, to the shortage of bus drivers, is that, they're still subject to drug testing, and under federal law, marijuana is still a prohibited drug when it comes to drug testing. And they say that is harming the number of bus drivers who are able to perform that duty.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because I'm guessing, like if we think about alcohol, like very clearly we are not, we don't want somebody to drive a bus that is under the influence, but a drug test for marijuana isn't about whether they are currently under the influence of marijuana. It's something that remains in their bloodstream. So I definitely could see where somebody that now participates in something that's legal on Sunday or on Saturday and then would drive a bus on Monday, but wouldn't be able to pass a drug test because I don't know the intricacies of how long it lasts in their bloodstream, but I can see where that would have an impact.
That's interesting, Brad. I had not heard that actually. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it was in the MIRS Capital newsletter yesterday.
Okay, I haven't read that yet.
And they were looking at it from the perspective of municipal drivers, but obviously that trickles down to school bus drivers as well.
We haven't found a silver bullet to it. It's wages, and I'm sure many others are dealing with. It's just, understanding wages that we have relative to not only neighboring districts, but also to the local McDonald's or to the local manufacturing base that we have. And are we competitive with those, again, not just districts, but other entities that are so desperately looking to hire people and then adjusting and negotiating from there. So,
well, and I had heard, for a long time we saw, bus drivers that, it was expensive, there was contracting out, often benefits either didn't exist previously or they didn't extend benefits to bus drivers. I have heard from districts that are now putting some level of health benefits, single subscriber, other things back on the table to attract bus drivers. Even if the pay is relatively low, they can at least compete with the McDonald's and others of the world if they're offering, even if it's a partial health benefit, to try to attract people into that busing world and into the transportation world for schools. But that of course increase costs for the district when you are able to, or when you go to that benefit. And even here at MASB as an employer, health benefits continue to become more expensive, so that's not easy to do.
We haven't actually done anything about this, but I keep getting intrigued every year for probably 5 years at the trade show at MASB conferences. I think it's Dean Transportation who cross trains in grounds and maintenance and bus driving, because they don't usually have to happen at the same time. Now, sometimes you get snow plowing that has to happen while your buses are running, but I've found that a really interesting idea. We have brought our grounds and maintenance staff back in-house, but not our bus drivers yet. And so, I think that's a really interesting out-of-the-box thing to look at. Who else is on your staff who maybe doesn't need to be doing their job while the buses are running and could be trained to drive bus?
So Stan, we did something similar, not with the maintenance. So I was going to speak up. So we did kind of a bus route and then they're like a parapro. So they wanted the benefit. So we did kind of so we balanced and really they float. It's like a floater. So they float to different buildings. Although the two that we kind of did this with and did the, beta with, now it's about a year old, ended up being kind of in buildings. But it started, they kind of did food care, food service, and still kept their route. So we did a similar, cross position. And so we've been under a year with it, and we've had 2 of them stay with it. So that's helped us out.
And I see the chat from Marcia. Who do you cross train to drive bus? What else do they do?
This is Marcia. It's our maintenance and custodians. We have small school districts, so neither job provides full-time employment usually. So we cross-train them so that number one, we can recruit people and we can get them to stay.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept. I mean, so often you hear from school districts, you know, when you have somebody come and drive a bus from 6:30 in the morning until 8:30 or whatever it is, and then they, you know, disappear for 6 hours and then have to come back. Like, there's not a lot of people signing up for that work. But if you can somehow fill that gap so that it becomes a full-time job, now granted, there's costs associated, but if you're compiling it and if they're both jobs that need to be done, that becomes a more attractive than that part-time work. And I think about it in a somewhat outside context. I think about being at the Lansing Center for our conference a couple of weeks ago and seeing job postings for their conference staff and saying that it was on call. And it made me, when I was at the conference, think about bus drivers at school. Like, who wants to take the job when you don't know whether, like, you're going to get called today to work or not? Like, that's a little more flexibility than most people want for a real job. And so I think if you can go that route for bus drivers, like, that definitely it is at least one tool in the toolbox to try to help out. I'm just reading some of the follow-up.
Stan, it sounds like you're outsourcing bus driving now. Do you find that Dean or whoever you work with has an easier time, that they seem to have staff readily?
No, we're still short.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine that that actually drives for Dean, and he drives motor coach for them and school buses for them, and they're constantly looking for bus drivers as they fill, and that's in mid-Michigan, not over in West Michigan by Stan. So I think, and Dean is actively looking and trying to recruit people because they're short as well.
Yeah, okay.
One consideration for those districts that currently directly employ their bus drivers, the outsource option is going to become much more difficult after February 13th or 14th, when you no longer have the issue of outsourcing a non-instructional service being a prohibited subject of bargaining. So any non-instructional service that's covered by a collective bargaining unit, if you're going to outsource that, now that issue has to be bargained. In the past, since the original PA 112, that was a prohibited subject of bargaining. So yeah, that's going to change substantially moving forward.
I think Kurt posted a question about strategic planning in the chat, and I mean, the one thing I would answer to this, and I think you're right, board members that have went through strategic planning, Kurt, may be able to answer this better than I. But ultimately, if the board feels that what you're doing in the strategic plan, like, specifically is going to focus, and there's always focus. You can't say on a strategic plan that you're going to do everything in that plan. So if your focus is going to be something specific to student achievement, the plan really should reflect that. It shouldn't be a, how do we align the two? It is, you go into the conversation with what your community wants, what the board wants, and then you align that strategic plan to it. So if it lands at student achievement, you're going to have a number of goals, and all of them might actually point directly at student achievement, not at other varying things. Like, that should be, you first decide what direction you want to go in, and if it's student achievement, or if it's graduation rates, or whatever the topic might be, then you start aligning goals to that. So, but I'd be welcome any board members that have recently went through strategic planning to help share your experience with Kurt.
This is Marcia again from Upper Michigan. I worked as a consultant for 9 northern counties in Northern California, and my job was to help them with their planning. And if student achievement is your goal, you need to first of all look and see what is working with student achievement. And you measure that by how many people are involved, what kind of growth are you getting. Make sure that you keep those things going. And then talk about, what is it that you want to do to improve student achievement? How are you going to do that? And quite frankly, as school people, everything needs to point to student achievement, everything. So, and Don is right, is you don't want to have 9 or 10 goals. You need to have 3 or 4, and then align what else you're doing with those goals.
Thank you for that, Marcia.
Yeah, we started, we launched a new strategic plan really middle of last year, give or take, running from 22 through 25. And rather than designing the strategic plan with ways to improve student achievement directly, we thought about the things that lead to student achievement. So every student needs some kind of support at some level or another, academically, socially, emotionally. And so that's one tier of our plan. We feel like we need a good culture of well-being and safety for everybody in the district, students, family, staff. And we needed to focus on our community because we can't really have high achieving students. At least it's a lot harder to have high achieving students when their parents aren't engaged and when community business partners aren't engaged. And so that's our kind of foundational tier.
Yeah, and our approach was very similar. We just launched another one a couple of months ago, and our approach is very similar to what Stan described. Very similar. And then we've also developed a, and this takes some time and thought, but we've developed a kind of a dashboard that says how do you point to some of the things. Some things are, you know, data rich and easy to measure, and some things are not. Like how do you measure, you know, social emotional improvement and things like that. So that's not a simple thing to do, but and it's something that we are evolving and will continue to evolve. But it does that kind of dashboard that we can all look at our ongoing monthly work sessions, allows everybody on the board and the administration to be aligned on what's important to us as a district. So.
As I listen to you talk about strategic planning, and thank you for adding the input and helping Kurt with this question. Over the years, as you know, MASB of course does strategic planning facilitation for districts. And I think we always used to have this perspective of strategic planning for like high achieving boards and districts would get into strategic planning. And I think that was probably based just on who was contacting us to do the work. But then over time, what we started seeing is, and it was something that you said, Ken, about kind of focus and accountability, that what we realized is when, and I'm saying this because of things that you all have mentioned in past webinars, what we see now is districts, and we even encourage it where it makes sense, because it doesn't always work, in districts where boards are not well connected. So you've got 7 board members and there's some kind of disconnect, marching in different directions, already coming to the board with agendas, whatever it might be. We are actually finding some success when that district decides and that board decides to go through a strategic planning process. Mm-hmm. It helps to focus those 7 individual board members into the direction that the board and the community decide to go with the administration. And so now, rather than strategic planning in this high achieving space, it is, I mean, clearly we understand strategic planning works for everybody, and it's hard to have your superintendent, if they don't have goals tied to an overall plan that the district's trying to move on. But we've seen like some nice things happen within boards to move things along, because now the board has figured out their mission is, once the plan's adopted, making sure that there's check-ins at board meetings and the superintendent's reporting on different things that the board has decided to measure. And it's really worked. I think it's really worked for districts. So as districts board members sitting out there and you're thinking, oh, like our board could never do that, we're not on the same page, how would we ever do that? With good facilitation, it actually might be a very good thing to think about. Like districts really should be doing it anyways. But don't sell your board short if you think somehow you have some dysfunction that won't work. It actually might help you create focus. because we have seen a bit of that. And so I just wanted to mention that as something that's out there. And we just had a question that got posed. I think it came in via email recently about aligning, how is strategic planning aligned with the new MyKIP piece at MDE, which is what we used to call school improvement plans, is now MyKIP. And one of the things that's nice in that space is we've worked with MDE over the last couple of years. And so our strategic planning process is now aligned and endorsed or sponsored with MDE so that it is a part of the MyKIP process as well. So as your staff is having to enter information into the Department of Ed's like portal for the MyKIP process, and one of the things that they have is strategic planning, it completely aligns with our process online. So we've tried to make sure now that the district staff, when they're doing MyKIP and school improvement, it also aligns with the board's action on strategic planning because you will remember, if you've been around for a while as a board member, your staff would handle school improvement. It was more of a check the box kind of item. And then the board might go through strategic planning, and they weren't connected, which caused really a misalignment of priorities. Now, the idea behind MDE and school improvement is those priorities should be aligned. So just to bring that up. Nick, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I would just say, the warning or the advice to everybody about strategic plan is it's the long game, and so is student achievement. And if you're for us, we're in a 3-year cycle, and we've had the same ongoing goals for 30 years in strategic planning. And so it's a mistake to look short term at little blips. You have to use the long game, particularly if you're using some of the student achievement data. So maybe staying flat is a positive for you. So you might decide to just go to a red, yellow, green sort of scorecard when you're looking at this kind of data. But my school data and other data, there's so many other smaller points that you can measure. But I think the risk of trying to create a new artifact or a new measurable for your goal, you need to have measurable goals, but sometimes the creation of a new measurement is almost as handcuffing as what the legislature likes to do consistently in throwing new things out there. And you have to put a whole structure in place that goes all the way down into a classroom. And you got some parapro marking something down because the board table had asked for a particular piece of data or a measurable. So you just have to be aware of those types of things. And I think we found that going red, yellow, green on some of the more really long-term things allow us to move in and out of green to yellow. And then if it's red, then obviously there's some tactical changes that need done in that next 3-year plan. But that would be my recommendation. Just be careful using what might be a short-term vision on a long-term trend, measurable like student achievement.
Thanks for that, Nick. I had a board member talk to me a couple of weeks ago, really with a concern about student achievement, kind of focusing at high school because her child happened to be in high school. And as we got talking about what was going on in that district, she mentioned that the school district had, I think like last year implemented really a new reading and curriculum and program in the elementary school. And my point to her was like, that is really a good move on that district's part to really create systems change, because for reading, like, and you need to start it at the elementary level. Of course, that district won't recognize the positive impact of that program if it's successful at the high school level for years. I mean, they can start measuring it at the elementary, but your point of really thinking about long term, I mean, depending on the program that you're implementing, you're not going to see movement in junior high test scores because of something that you implemented that was spot on at the elementary level. And boards need to be cognizant that not everything can happen in a couple of years. Like it's foundational and systemic. And the hard thing for you as board members is having a community pushing on you to get something done, and they want to see results next week. And we know that change in education, not because we are a status quo operators, but ultimately change in education takes a long time because it's class to class to class as they move through. And it was just, by the end of the conversation, she was kind of recognizing like their district was doing some good things. It just hadn't got to the point where it was necessarily affecting her daughter positively, because her daughter was kind of through that spot already, and it was going to take some time to get there. Looking at a couple people have posted, thank you for the comments from a number of people that are working with MASB on strategic planning. Colleen, what do you as board members do to stay connected to and reach out to the public? Personal goals: to be connected, to listen and try to understand points of view. I'm not that great with social media. I know how to use it. I just don't have the patience to use it consistently. I think there's probably a number of people on today that have gotten to a place of not wanting to use social media as well. Thoughts from people on how you stay connected and feel that the public has an opportunity to engage with you as board members individually or as a whole board? Anybody doing creative things in that? Doesn't look like a lot of hands. Oh, Nick just unmuted.
Yeah, I would say, you know, there's a relationship that you might have if you're going to do things during school events. And I would say this is something I've done in the past, but I've done it with the permission of whoever the current board president was at the time and the superintendent. You might go hang out at the high school during student parent conferences and just have a table there. And I promise you, people will stop at the table and they'll be talking about minutia items that have nothing to do with, you know, a board role. However, it's good to sit there, especially if you're embarking on some transformational change or whatever. But I've had some of the best input just sitting there at a table or handing out, you know, bond brochures or whatever it happens to be. Student teacher conferences are usually a fairly low-hanging fruit item where you'll be exposed whether you like it or not, or whether the parent likes it or not. You'll be there at a table, probably being handled by the school leader or the superintendent or someone else. But I wouldn't just go set up a table on your own. I would make sure that, you know, you're going to be cover items that they know you're going to cover. Here's the strategic plan, or here are items that, you know, we can talk about, or hand out your strategic plan, because most people won't click on that page on your website. That would be some low-hanging fruit that you could do. And at an elementary, it's kind of a similar process. But if you're looking for staff input, take a giant crock pot of chili with you when you go, because most of them can't go home in between. But I would do something like that, and you'll get both staff feedback and community feedback. But make sure you have your board president and your superintendent involved. Don't just pitch a tent and go.
Nick, you said that and it made me, and I looked to see if she was on. Jill Fennessy, our past president with Tri-County Schools north of Grand Rapids. They actually, I don't know if they do it at other events, but each football season they have a board table. They always have two board members. It's not just one board member. So they always know that it's kind of a shared accountability sort of thing. And they have a table at every home football game that has two board members to do that very thing that you're talking about. It's set up and scheduled, and it's just an opportunity to share and to get to your point about making sure you're not on your own pitching a tent. It's a board activity, and they share that kind of thing. And Jill, like every year she mentions, oh, I'm going to be sitting at the table this week or whatever. And they've also found it to be a really good way to just casually get, comments, input, that sort of thing.
Ours is more formal, and we haven't done it recently, but for years we held a community dinner and invited everybody, and then held some sort of student activity with it. It might be showing artwork or something like that, and that was really great. And then we had a superintendent who moved it from being the entire community to being the seniors in our community. And then he held them more frequently and just answered all their questions that they had about the district from a senior's perspective. And they were both very productive.
Thank you, Kathleen.
I think I have a pretty good relationship with my community. I'm retired and I am always volunteering to help with community groups. I mean, I am so busy. The youth assistance, blessing a backpack, the food program at the church. I have a group that I meet with at McDonald's on Wednesday mornings for breakfast. It's not necessarily school stuff, but they know where I'm coming from. And I have no trouble getting folks really whenever I run for a position, but I am well known in the community because I am very involved.
Thank you for that, Linda. That's good advice. I saw Jill also posted. Absolutely. If you're in a small town, you can't leave the grocery store without somebody talking school business to you. So that's the pluses and minuses of being in a small town and having the school board where you don't have to look for ways to get to them. They find you pretty easily. But in the larger districts, it sometimes is more difficult to put yourself out there. And so hopefully in the responses that were there, you know, this for you, Colleen, that started this conversation, that gives you some ideas on what some possibilities might be in that space.
This does. I just unmuted myself. Thank you to everybody who gave such good ideas. I've been a little anxious about it. I'm trying to connect, and I've actually gone to some PTA meetings, and I'm trying to just get out there more. So I really like some of these ideas. I get anxious about, I've been cautioned that only the board president speaks for the board. And I understand that. I know as an individual board member, I can speak for myself. I can certainly speak about things we've talked about in public, but if I'm going out and doing these things, am I worried that people will think I am speaking on behalf of the board? How do I address that?
Yeah, that's a great point, Colleen. And I was going to kind of put a caveat out there that, you know, when you are connecting with your community, always go to your policies and bylaws to ensure that you're 100% in compliance, particularly with the code of ethics in your bylaws, to ensure that you're not giving the impression, you know, that you're speaking on behalf of the board. This issue came up in the context of board members that have approached other board members and administrators about having coffee hours. You know, much like members of the legislature, they will have a designated time each month or quarterly where they'll meet in a local restaurant and folks will come in and talk with them. And I'm not sure how that works at the board level, but my advice on that was the administration and the district should really keep an arm's length, hands-off approach to individual board members who want to do that. You know, certainly individual board members can do that. There isn't any restriction against it, but it should be an independent decision of that board member, you know, not being endorsed by the district or endorsed by a majority of the board. And I think in most cases, Colleen, I think people understand that you're speaking as an individual board member, but it never hurts to give that that disclaimer that when you're talking with someone, I'm speaking independently here. This is how I feel personally on a particular subject. It's not, you know, the board's position.
Well, I think
Thank you.
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Well, I think the other thing I would add to Brad's always excellent advice is, for me, efforts to connect with the community are a lot more about listening than they are about talking. Mm-hmm. I want to hear from them, and I can say, thank you for your input. Or if they say something that isn't true, I can correct a misimpression, a misunderstanding. I can certainly talk about actions that the board has taken But I tend not to talk about things that we're still thinking about. I just say we're still thinking about that. We have more discussion and investigation to do.
Good advice, Dan. And what I was going to say, and I see Susie has her hand up. The other thing I hear from board members is when they are out in public, in some ways you get, whether it be formally or at the grocery store or whatever, that board members feel somewhat powerless might be the wrong word, but somebody brings a problem to you, right? Like they're going to complain about something, maybe legitimately. And I think all of our natures is like, we want to give them an answer or a solution. And as a board member, the answer often has to be, thank you for that. I will run that up, through the chain of command. I'll pass that on to the superintendent. And for, board members that are, they want to help school districts, you're there for a purpose. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is not be the problem solver and just say that, thank you for that. I'll make sure that, that gets, not that it's going to get addressed, but that you're going to give it to the appropriate people and they will look into it or they will get back with you. And so I just hear that from board members sometimes, that's a hard thing for them to deal with, is wanting, and that's where I hear from other board members where somebody promised to fix something and it wasn't their place to do that either. So I hear it from both sides. Susie, I saw your hand up and then I saw it disappear. I don't know if you still wanted to make a comment.
No, I'm sorry. I am on my small iPad, so my finger touched the wrong place.
Not a problem at all.
Hey, Don, if I could just comment real quick.
Ken.
This is a pertinent enough subject that we have some board goals, 2 or 3 goals that we as a board want to work on as a district, and communication with as a board, not a district, separate from the strategic planning, and community communication with all of the emergence of social media, with book discussions and everything going on. We've set that as a board goal to say we want to really spend some time talking about this as a board and aligning on it, matching to our policies, as Brad said, and then matching to our code of conduct, and and think about how we want to communicate with the community in a consistent manner, and in a different manner than we are today. And so we've set it up as a goal to work through for the fiscal year, for the calendar year, for us. So because there's like Brad said, there's so many different facets to this.
Thanks for that, Ken. Mark's point that he made in the chat is something, and maybe Brad, you've heard from boards on this, but it's I think a point worth noting. Like, even though I think certain things within law require people to notify you if they're recording you, very clearly that doesn't always happen. So particularly if you're somewhere, you're at a table, some formal event where they know you're going to be there, it's probably not bad to anticipate that somebody may be recording from the offside. They might be recording on their phone. It's sad that we're in that space, but I think it's good advice to always at least be cognizant of that as being a possibility. The hope is that as board members, you're always speaking in a way that is never going to bring problems or embarrassment to the board. But if you think about it and being recorded, you're even more likely to be in that space to be safe. So.
Yeah, on that issue of recording, so with Michigan, just one party has to provide consent to the conversation. So, use the example of a phone call, 2 people having a phone call. As long as one person, the person who's recording it, gives consent to recording that phone call, the other person who's on the other end could have no idea that it's being recorded, and that would still be in compliance with our wiretapping laws. It becomes an issue when you have a third party taping a private conversation between 2 individuals.
Thanks for that clarification, Brad. Shelley, your hand is up.
Yeah, I wanted to just go back to that community member who approaches you in the grocery store or whatever with a problem. I think as a board member, it's a good time to help your community understand how to solve problems besides just coming after board members. So when I'm addressed for something out in the community, I typically ask first, have they reported it to whoever, directly? So, if the problem is with a bus driver, have they talked to the bus driver? If not the bus driver, maybe they didn't get anything from them, then the bus driver's supervisor, which might be the principal. If they haven't seen the principal, that's that next step. And if, beyond the principal, it might be, the transportation director, or it might even be the superintendent before they come to the board with an issue. So I think it's a good learning lesson to help people understand how to address issues that they have in a school. If the issue is with the teacher, they should talk to the teacher first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of go up that ladder. And certainly it makes sense that I'm going to mention to the superintendent that I've heard this comment from a person out in the real world. But again, I just see it as a learning lesson to help the community understand how to address issues.
Shelley, that's a great point, and that's the reason why I brought up policy. I believe the Neola templates almost exactly indicate what you provided in terms of going through the chain of command when you're outside communicating as a board member. And it even has some pretty strong language that categorizes some conversations as unethical conduct if you're talking with a staff member and that conversation leads to criticizing another staff member, and the board member and the one staff member are going back and forth about that third staff member.
I would even add to Mark's comment that even if it's not an anticipated meeting, even if somebody just walks up to you in the grocery store, assume you're being recorded.
Good point, Stan. And I know last year, Brad and I, through different places, received emails of phone recordings during the campaign as people would walk up to school board members to put them on the spot at football games in the fall. And, so clearly that's becoming more and more of a regular occurrence. So I think it was just good advice to be aware of. Kurt posted another question about growing your own. I know a number of districts are starting grow your own programs. Probably haven't had, because of just the length of time to get there, maybe haven't seen a swell of teachers available for you. But anybody want to comment on success you're seeing, participation you're seeing in any kind of grow your own initiatives related to trying to deal with the teacher shortage in your districts?
Yeah, I'll just comment on that real quick. Not only am I on our local board, but I'm on our Auto Area ISD board as well. And with Auto Area ISD, we're part of two different consortiums involved. Each consortium deals with different colleges. That's one way it's set up. But currently in our ISD, we have roughly 200 participants enrolled in our Grow Your Own programs throughout the whole ISD, multiple staff members in every district, basically. So I'm really looking forward to it. One thing to keep in mind is, a lot of these people are working full time as well. So this is not going to be hey, you're going to have 200 teachers next year, but it's going to take a little bit of time for it to happen. But I'm really looking forward to how this pans out, because we definitely have some, like in our local district, that are special education assistants that are now ones that are going through the program, which, we all know there's a pretty big lack, especially in special education teachers. So they'll pretty much roll right into that as well.
Thanks for that, Mark. Shelley, you have another comment?
Yeah, I know the Marquette Algerisa and many other ISDs are all part of the Teach Together consortium.
Yep.
We're the fiduciary for that, and we just received $45 million grant dollars to help across the state, and doing some of the very things that we just heard is, if a person has they're a parapro and they would like to move into teaching, this allows them to take those classes at the universities that are participating, which there are several of those. They take the classes, we backfill with the grant dollars, we backfill that parapro's work so that the school district isn't short. It doesn't have to pay for that. It's a wonderful program, and we're just this is the inaugural thing. We're still in the hiring process of people across the state to do some of these jobs, but I think it says that everybody's trying to work on this. And I don't remember the exact count of the ISDs anymore, but it's the majority of ISDs in the state that are taking part in this. And several, maybe 5 to 7 universities that are taking part. I don't remember the exact numbers anymore. And so I think there's a major push for all of this across the state. We all need teachers. And so we're the parapros, a teacher who's maybe at a basic level can move on and get that advanced degree, or someone who wants to do special ed, already has a teaching degree but wants to move into a different area. So the grant or the consortium is working on all of that. If you're not aware if your district is part of that, I would ask those questions. It's called Teach Together.
Thanks for that, Shelley. I know that was an item in the school aid budget this past year, and they put that money forth. Nick, you had your hand up?
Yeah, it actually ties in with your comment about the school aid budget and the topic of strategic planning earlier. I'm not going to talk about our particular plan because I want to address making sure that it's part of your long-term strategy, because as many of us know, there are some things that make it into the budget for, let's just say there's a nice round number of 3 years or 2 years. And the next thing you know, Jen's telling us that didn't make the categorical list for 2026. So for us, we've been talking about our program strategically and adding it into our strategic plan for Grow Our Own, so that we can, as a district, commit to that, whether or not the state funds it or not. Now, obviously, we might not be able to do 30 or 40 or whatever we're doing now. We might only be able to do 5, but that's an important 5 people, and the investment that you would need in, as mentioned earlier, covering a parapro who needs to go off to Aquinas College for 2 or 3 days during the week for a few hours. I would just encourage you to make sure that you try and get it into your strategic plan, because again, a strategic plan isn't there to, be completely consumed up and start over in 3 years. It's the long game. So you need to make sure you try and get that in so that at some level you're committed to it long-term and not wholly dependent on Lansing. So that would just be my advice, because that's kind of the approach we're taking here in Rockford. That is something we were talking about doing, whether we got money from Lansing or not, or the ISD was going to be involved. We're fortunate to be part of all of this now, but long term, you need to consider getting that in your plans.
Thanks for that, Nick. Appreciate it. I mean, I think, schools in general, have operated with this kind of endless supply of teachers coming out of colleges. If any of you think about the places that you often work in, like in the workplace, we often what opportunities do people have within your company to advance to the next level? How do you as a company provide them professional development to get them to that director level in your organization? If schools start thinking of that in the sense of, in the long term, that there might be a role to play as an employer to say, how would we, even aside from the shortage, but how would we approach our parapros and others to say, would you be interested in the next level, which would be a teaching position, and what can we do to help foster that growth? I just don't think it's an area that schools really have had to think much about, just because we didn't have a shortage. Now I think maybe it will create some innovative thinking on how to, continue to build that even beyond the point that we have a shortage. We know that keeping people, we think about careers up until now, people taught for 30 years in the same district. Generationally, I just don't see kids sticking around that come in at 22 years old. We're not going to see as many 30-year teachers, but create opportunities for other people in other positions in your district that you might keep them around because you help them after 6 years as a parapro get a degree that now they're going to be a teacher for you for another 10 years, and you keep somebody in your district for 20 years rather than leaving them or having them leave in 10 because they go off to a different career. So just different opportunities that we have to think about. And I don't think schools haven't thought in that way very often. I know we're getting close to the end. I know that, Jen, I know you wanted to touch base briefly on the webinar that you have coming up and be able to share that. And I know Brad, after Jen, I know you wanted to touch base on a couple of things as well.
Actually, it's the webinar we just did. If you weren't at ALC or on the webinar last week, it was last Monday. It's posted now on our YouTube channel. We did a 2023 wrap-up edition because we're done, weirdly. So we went through things that have passed, things that will be going into effect in February, including the para changes, and things that we're looking for next year, and the oddness of going to Sine Die on November 12th, I think it was, and with the House being 54-54. So we covered all that. If you were at ALC, you heard most of it. The only change from ALC to the webinar was that the special elections have been called, and they will be, the primary is January, the general is April. So the House should return to 110 members on April 30th, or at least by the end of the month at some point. But until then, we're 54-54. So it'll be an interesting first 4 months of the year. And Larissa put the link to the webinar in the chat.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Larissa. Brad, you want to touch base a little bit on, Jen just mentioned Paris, so you were talking about policies related to that.
Yeah, probably the last thing to mention here in the last couple of minutes. So at your December meeting, if you haven't had it yet, or your upcoming January meeting, which may be part of your organizational meeting, you're going to be presented some proposed policies. Policy providers Neola, Troon, Miller Johnson have put out either new policies or amended policies relating to the soon to be repealed prohibited subjects of bargaining. And the thought behind putting out new policies on these issues is that the policies will be your starting point for proposals in negotiating these new mandatory subject of bargaining that haven't been mandatory subjects, for the past 13 years or so. And there are going to be some legal requirements relating to some of these new mandatory subjects as well, with teacher placement, layoff and recall, and the development, content, implementation of teacher evaluations. So that's going to be a main priority moving forward here in December and January. You get those policies adopted, so they will be ready to go when it's negotiating time, and you get your first proposal from the union on what their thoughts are on these new mandatory subjects, and then districts can respond accordingly with the proposed policies indicating, yeah, this is going to be our starting point from negotiations.
Good guidance, Brad. I know you also said that you might want to touch base on a pending court case that deals with social media.
Yeah, wasn't sure if we had time for that, but I guess we do have a little bit of time left over. And that almost tied into the conversation we were having earlier about being in touch with the community and using social media for that purpose. There's actually a Supreme Court case pending right now. They've had the oral arguments. The decision will likely be issued, I would say, sometime in March or April. Whether a board member's personal social media account would be subject to the First Amendment. So if you're putting out information on social media relating to your duties and responsibilities as a board member, giving updates, and then you get pushback from an adversary and you decide to block that person, is blocking that person a free speech violation. So you take it in the context of, okay, what if your school district had a social media site and it allows back and forth discussions? Yes, your school district cannot arbitrarily block someone from their social media page if they engage in comments or communications that the district agrees with or disagrees with. So then you apply that same analysis to an individual board member and whether their social media page was created an open forum under the First Amendment. So there's been 2 cases appealed to the Supreme Court, one from Michigan actually, where it found that a city manager's personal social media account wasn't subject to the First Amendment. So blocking an individual from that account wasn't a First Amendment violation. However, there's a Ninth Circuit opinion that went the other way, where you had school board members that were using social media for school board related purposes and blocked individuals from those accounts. And the Ninth Circuit found that to be a First Amendment violation. So we'll see what the Supreme Court does with this issue. Once it's decided, we'll certainly give some guidance in response to that decision.
Thanks for that, Brad. Stan posted an article so that people can look up that specific case. And we are right at 1 o'clock. I always tell you that we want to keep to your schedule so that you can get back to whatever you're doing if you're at work or wherever it might be. So I just want to say again, thank you very much for being on today. Thank you for all that you're doing in your districts. Enjoy all of the holiday choir and bands are happening in your districts right now. I think if you have a good time of year to be a board member, it's at graduation time and at holiday time, because you get to really see displays of what the kids do all the way from elementary to high school. So just thank you very much. I hope everybody has a great holiday season. We will be back with our Member Matters stuff in the new year. But we're always here, Brad, Jen, I, and the rest of our staff. If you have questions, need assistance, want clarification, feel free to reach out. We're happy to be here to help all of you and what you're doing. So have a great rest of your week. And thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.